Question 776. Which of the following is not required to be in writing, according to the statute of frauds? A. An agreement that specifies it must be performed over a 2-year period. B. An exclusive right to sell listing agreement. C. A partnership agreement to develop real property. D. An apartment lease with a duration of 3 years. Correct answer is C. A partnership agreement to develop real property. The statute of frauds is a law that requires certain types of contracts to be in writing to be enforceable. While the specific requirements can vary by jurisdiction, generally, contracts that involve the sale of real estate or that cannot be performed within 1 year must be in writing. Therefore, while most contracts involving real estate or long-term agreements must be in writing, a partnership agreement is not specifically required to be in writing under the statute of frauds. Particularly if the partnership itself is the primary object rather than the direct transfer of a specific parcel of land, does not necessarily need to be in writing. The partnership agreement establishes a relationship between the partners, not a direct transfer of real estate between them as individuals. An oral agreement to form a partnership to deal in real estate can be enforceable. However, it's generally advisable to have any important business agreement in writing to avoid misunderstandings and disputes. Question 777. Buyer Brian makes an offer to purchase real property from seller Sandy and provides a deposit. If Brian subsequently withdraws his offer before Sandy accepts it, then A. The seller can successfully sue the buyer for specific performance. B. The buyer can recover his deposit. C. The broker can successfully sue the buyer for specific performance. D. The seller can keep the earnest money deposit. Correct answer is B. The buyer can recover his deposit. For a binding contract to exist in real estate, there must be a valid offer and acceptance. Until the seller accepts the offer, the offerer, buyer Brian, is free to revoke their offer. The deposit, earnest money, is given to show the buyer's serious intent to purchase. However, it's typically held in escrow or by the broker and is contingent upon the formation of a valid contract. If Brian withdraws his offer before Sandy accepts it, there is no contract formed. Since no contract exists, Brian is entitled to the return of his deposit. Specific performance is a remedy to force a party to complete a contract. Since no contract was formed, the offer was withdrawn before acceptance, there's nothing for the seller to enforce. Brokers are generally not parties to the purchase agreement itself, so they cannot sue for specific performance of the sale. Their right to a commission typically arises from a valid listing agreement with the seller and the successful procurement of a ready, willing, and able buyer, which usually culminates in an accepted offer. The seller can only keep the earnest money deposit, as liquidated damages, if a valid contract was formed and the buyer subsequently breached it. Since the offer was withdrawn before acceptance, no contract was formed, and the seller has no claim to the deposit. Question 778. A tenant with a lease to reside in an apartment building asks the landlord to repair the washing machines in the building's laundry room. The landlord ignores the tenant's repeated requests. In reaction, the tenant decides to stop paying his monthly rent until the landlord does the repairs. The tenant is A. In the right, B. In the wrong, C. Can bill the landlord for the cost of doing his laundry outside the boodling, D. Both A and C. Correct answer is B. In the wrong. While a tenant has the right to a habitable living space, withholding rent as a form of self-help is generally not allowed. If the landlord fails to address the tenant's repair requests, the tenant should follow the proper legal channels, such as 1. Send a written notice. The tenant should send a written notice to the landlord, clearly outlining the repairs needed and giving the landlord a reasonable time to address the issue. 2. File a complaint with the local housing authority. If the landlord fails to respond to the tenant's notice, the tenant can file a complaint with the local housing authority or other appropriate government agency. 3. Withhold rent as a last resort. In some jurisdictions, Tenants may be allowed to withhold rent as a last resort if the landlord fails to address serious habitability issues that affect the tenant's health and safety. However, this should be done with caution and after consulting with legal counsel. Withholding rent without following the proper legal procedures can put the tenant at risk of eviction. It's important to address maintenance issues through appropriate channels to protect the tenant's rights. Question 779. The parties to a deed are called: A. Grantor and grantee. B. Deedor and deedee. C. Vendor and vendee. D. Land provider and recipient. Correct answer is A. Grantor and grantee. Vendor and vendee terms are typically used in the context of a purchase agreement or land contract. The vendor is the seller, and the vendee is the buyer. While related to real estate transactions, they are not the specific terms for the parties on the deed itself. Land provider and recipient are generic terms and not the precise legal designations used for parties to a deed. In a deed, the grantor and the grantee terms are commonly used in real estate transactions. Grantor is the party who conveys or grants an interest in real property. In simpler terms, the seller. Grantee is the party who receives the interest in real property. In simpler terms, the buyer. Question 780. Examples of the police power include the following, except: A. Building codes. B. Zoning regulation. C. Taxation. D. Rent control. Correct answer is C. Taxation. Building codes are regulations that establish minimum standards for construction, safety, and public health within buildings. They are a classic example of police power. Zoning laws dictate how land can be used, e.g., residential, commercial, industrial, and specify building sizes, setbacks, and density. They are a prime example of police power exercised to manage urban development and maintain community character. Rent control is a government regulation that limits the amount a landlord can charge for rent. It is exercised under the police power, often justified as promoting the general welfare by ensuring affordable housing. Taxation is the government's power to levy charges on individuals or property to raise revenue for public services. While essential for government function, it is a separate and distinct power from police power. It's the power of the government to take money, not to regulate for health, safety, and welfare. Question 781. Broker Alan tries to persuade a group of homeowners to list their homes with him by forecasting that people with disabilities will be moving into their neighborhood, resulting in lower property values. Alan is engaged in: A. Blockbusting. B. Redlining. C. Steering. D. Pressuring. Correct answer is A. Blockbusting. Redlining is the illegal practice of denying services, like loans or insurance, to residents of certain geographic areas, typically based on race or ethnicity, regardless of their qualifications. It's about denying access to services, not inducing sales. Steering is the illegal practice of guiding prospective homebuyers towards or away from certain neighborhoods based on their protected characteristics. For example, showing only homes in certain areas to families of a particular race. It's about directing buyers, not inducing sellers to sell. While Alan is certainly pressuring the homeowners, pressuring is a general term. Blockbusting is the specific legal term for this discriminatory and illegal real estate practice. Blockbusting, also known as panic peddling, is an illegal tactic used by real estate agents. They exploit homeowners' fears that a protected group moving in will lower property values, urging them to sell cheaply. Agents then profit by reselling those homes at higher prices. The key element is inducing sales through fear of undesirable groups moving in. It is grounds for the real estate commissioner to impose disciplinary action, comprising suspension, revoking, or denying a real estate license. Question 782. Someone who inherits property through intestate succession has done so through a holographic will, b. dying declaration, c. decision by a probate court, d. formally witnessed will. Correct answer is C. decision by a probate court. A holographic will is a will written entirely in the testator's, the person making the will, own handwriting and signed by them, without witnesses. If a valid holographic will exists, then the person has not died intestate, and the property would be distributed according to that will, not by intestate succession. A dying declaration is a statement made by a person who believes they are about to die. While this can be relevant in certain legal situations, it is still the distribution of property with a valid will. A formally witnessed will is a traditional will that is typically typed and signed by the testator in the presence of witnesses, who also sign the will. If such a will exists and is valid, the person has not died intestate, and property would be distributed according to the will. Question 783. A legal charge on a property by a public entity to pay for public improvements is called A. Eminent domain, b. a municipal renovation fee, c. a special assessment, d. a public improvements charge. Correct answer is C. A special assessment. Eminent domain is the government's constitutional right to take private property for public use, even if the owner doesn't want to sell, as long as the owner receives just compensation. It's about taking property, not a charge for improvements. A municipal renovation fee is not the standard legal term for a charge specifically tied to public improvements that benefit specific properties. A public improvements charge is descriptive. Special assessment is the precise legal and common term used in real estate for this type of charge. A special assessment is a type of tax levied on property owners to fund specific public improvements that benefit the property. These improvements can include things like new streets, sidewalks, sewers, or other infrastructure projects. The cost of the improvement is divided among the property owners who benefit from it, and each property owner is assessed a portion of the total cost based on the value of their property. The charge is special because it only applies to those properties that directly benefit from the improvement, and it's assessment because it's levied to recover the cost of that improvement. Question 784. The statute of frauds, the legal requirement for a contract to be signed in writing, applies to all of the following types of contracts, except A. An exclusive brokerage agreement, b. an agreement to perform a service that can be completed within a year, c. an agreement to perform a service that cannot be completed within a year, d. an agreement by a purchaser to pay a debt secured by a mortgage on the purchased property. Correct answer is B. An agreement to perform a service that can be completed within a year. The statute of frauds requires certain contracts to be in writing to be enforceable. The main categories typically include 1. Contracts that cannot be performed within 1 year. 2. Contracts for the sale of real estate or an interest in real estate. 3. Contracts for the sale of goods over a certain dollar amount, e.g., $500 under the UCC. 4. Contracts where one party promises to answer for the debt of another, suretyship. 5. Contracts made in consideration of marriage. 6. Agreements by a purchaser of real property to pay indebtedness secured by a mortgage. Therefore, the one that is not required to be in writing, according to the statute of frauds, is an agreement to perform a service that can be completed within a year. Question 785. A judgment that has been properly recorded is A. voluntary lien, B. foreclosure, C. lien pendens, D. involuntary lien. Correct answer is D. Involuntary lien. A voluntary lien is one created with the owner's consent, such as a mortgage or deed of trust, where the owner willingly pledges their property as collateral for a loan. Foreclosure is the process by which a lender or other lienholder forces the sale of a property to satisfy a debt. A recorded judgment is a type of lien that could lead to foreclosure, but it is not the foreclosure process itself. A lei pendens, Latin for suit pending, is a recorded notice that a lawsuit is ongoing concerning title to or possession of a particular piece of real property. It clouds the title and warns potential buyers, but it is a notice of a lawsuit, not a lien itself in the same way a recorded judgment is. While it can precede a judgment that creates a lien, it's not the lien itself. When a judgment for money is properly recorded, in the county where real property is located, it creates a general lien against all non-exempt real property owned by the judgment debtor in that county. Involuntary lien is involuntary, because it is placed on the property by operation of law, due to the court judgment, without the property owner's consent. The owner didn't willingly agree to have this specific encumbrance on their property.